The world's most powerful economic indicator is giving us a signal we cannot ignore. I'm going to reveal exactly what's going on and what this means for the U.S. economy in 3 simple, fast steps. Step number 1, let's go over what's happening with the ADP data. The labor market is actually the economic indicator I'm referring to. So we're going to start with a chart from today's date going all the way back to 2021. On the left, we go from 0 up to 1.2 million. Now, this is very, very important because the ADP data represents private sector jobs. And at the end of the day, in my opinion, that's the best reflection as to what is happening with the underlying economy. And for those of you who watch my videos, you know that the 2 indicators I pay the most attention to are interest rates and the labor market. Now, this doesn't really give me a signal as far as the stock market, but it gives me great insights as to what's happening with the underlying economy, starting with the fundamentals. Okay, we go back to 2021, right around 600,000 jobs. Now, this is 600,000 new jobs we were getting every single month. Now, editor, go and throw up the chart, and I want the viewers to notice that this isn't the exact same chart. What I've done is I've kind of smoothed out what you see there just so we can get the idea of the overall trend. Now, 2022, or maybe at the end of 2021, we're way up here. I mean, we're printing 1.2 million jobs per month. Holy cow. But then we get the old wet and wild ride where it goes down, 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 down. Not necessarily Wile E. Coyote. We got to keep our metaphors accurate here on the George Gammon channel. And notice in 2024, we get a little bit of a bump, but then the roller coaster ride continues down to the point where we are today, where these numbers have gone negative. The ADP, the monthly report, has shown negative private job growth 4 out of the last 6 months. This is the key. You do not want to see this. In fact, I should have circled it right here and put no bueno zone. And I also want to highlight the fact that the non-farm payrolls have been declining substantially. With the revisions, when we get them outside of the government shutdown, we have seen negative non-farm payrolls. That is very, very unusual outside of an economic contraction or recession. And then the Challenger data, this just came out the other day and showed that for November, we had 70,000 announced job cuts. Again, this is for the private sector, so very important we pay attention. Now you might be saying to yourself, okay, George, 70,000, that doesn't mean anything to me. Give me some context. We'll go ahead and do that. Outside of 2022, this is the worst number we have seen since 2008. And if I'm not mistaken, as far as Novembers are concerned, this is the worst number we have seen going all the way back to the early 2000s. So when you look at the fact that private payrolls, using the ADP data as an overall proxy, has been negative 4 of the last 6 months, and compare that to where we have been, and then on top of that, we've got the non-farm payrolls really declining, Challenger data absolutely terrible, and then what's happening with the unemployment rate. It is very difficult to come to any other conclusion other than the labor market is getting extremely, extremely weak. And in all the thousands of videos I have done on YouTube and all the research I've done for those videos, one of the main conclusions that I've come to is as the labor market goes, so goes the United States economy. But there is one other indicator that's just as powerful, I think, as the labor market, and that's something we're going to get into in step number 3. But just to make sure we're all on the same page, I went ahead and gave you guys some incredible artwork. That's right. These are some characters from past whiteboard videos that really give you an idea, visual representation of basically this chart, what's happening with the labor market and the U.S. economy. So back in 2021, 2022, the U.S. economy and the labor market was just like this guy. Whoa, the crypto bro coming in with his NFT hat, dollar signs for his eyes. He's popping bottles in the club. He's got a sign that says, "Have fun staying poor." He's got a necklace here, probably made from the tears of all the poor people that weren't smart enough to buy Dogecoin. And editor, we had all these memes that went along with it, like the Ray Liotta or the Leonardo DiCaprio. That's basically what the US labor market was like back in 2021 and 2022. But then we go to 2023 to 2024, and not so many bottles being popped at the old club. Now it's kind of like the average Joe that just has like a 9-to-5 job. Not too bad, but not too great. But now the labor market is much more like Moody the millennial with their blue hair, because I don't know the preferred pronouns. And Moody is always kind of in that state of depression and kind of bummed out. And, they might be able to afford to put food on the table, but things are kind of tough. They're always complaining. That's where we are right now. Now, the problem here is not that we're going to stay in the same Moody the millennial mode, but it's where the trend is going. So the trend, I'm trying to think of another whiteboard character that would be appropriate for the trend. The trend is heroin guy. That's where we're going. Editor, go ahead and throw up a picture of heroin guy. Just passed out on the street with a needle in his veins. He's got X's for eyes. That's basically where this trend is going. And that's why what we're going over here in step number 1 is so absolutely crucial for investors to pay very close attention to. But analyzing the labor market isn't necessarily so clear-cut. And here's where it gets really, really bizarre. Step number 2. Now let's go over this very unique concept of the no hire, no fire labor market that we may be in right now and what that tells us about the economy. Because at the end of the day, obviously, that's what's most important. So we go straight over to Zero Hedge. And the title here, No Hire, No Fire Economy Confirmed as U.S. Jobless Claims and Hiring Plans Plummet. So the claims are plummeting, but yet the hiring is plummeting, and we're getting negative ADP numbers. And with revisions, we're getting negative non-farm payrolls, and the unemployment rate is going up. What on earth is happening? Let's go to this article that I'm going to connect some dots for you. And then at the end of this video, we're going to go over an indicator that I think is just as powerful as the labor market and see what that's telling us, what that is revealing about the U.S. economy. All right, so here's a chart. Look at this green line. As Zero Hedge points out, we're currently, with initial jobless claims, at the lowest level that we have seen since the cerveza sickness, when everyone was just flush with stimmy checks. And prior to that, you have to go back to 1969. 1969. So if you just looked at initial jobless claims, you'd come to the opposite conclusion. You'd say, oh my gosh, the labor market is on fire. But as always, the devil's in the details. Let's keep going. They highlight the fact that distortions around Thanksgiving likely skewed the reading. California, Texas, New York saw the largest drop in non-seasonally adjusted claims. And look at this next chart, real head scratcher. We've got a 4-week moving average of initial claims, this green line, but the red line is continuing claims. So if initial jobless claims at the lowest level, basically outside of the cerveza sickness, since 1969, why on earth are continuing claims so high? Let's keep digging here and try to find some more information so we can reconcile all of this data. So the next chart we come to is Revelio. I've never heard of Revelio, but Zero Hedge points out it's an alternative labor market signal that's more in line with ADP. And this shows 9,000 job losses in November, and the trend looks very, very similar
to that ADP chart that we showed in step number 1. And next we go back to the Challenger Gray and Christmas report. It shows that for year to date, so for 2025 so far, employers have announced 497,000 hires, down 35% from the exact same point in 2024. And this is the lowest level that they have seen since 2010, which was just in the aftermath of the GFC. Then we've got the WARN data. Now, I don't know what this is. I've never heard of this prior to doing this video. So let's get into the nitty-gritty here. As Bloomberg's Simon White notes, the WARN Act obliges employers with more than 100 full-time workers to provide written notice to the state and workers themselves at least 60 to 90 days ahead of planned plant closings and mass layoffs. Wow, I didn't even know that. It is one of the best real-time reads on the labor market and has remained very low and steady around an average of 220,000, 230,000 over the past 2 years. But we see what that has done more recently, and this black line is a moving average, but the gold line tells you the absolute numbers, and we can see that's going in the wrong direction. This is going up, and although you get some false positives here, like they're saying, this usually is a good leading indicator for the labor market, which is a good leading indicator for the underlying economy. And here's another chart that's really interesting. Unemployment's path is higher next year, so the trend is higher. So this black line is U.S. unemployment rate, but the gold line is the unemployment rate from the NFIB small businesses. And they're saying that the single most important problem is poor sales, which would be very consistent with what we're seeing in the negative ADP numbers, the revisions being negative to the non-farm payrolls, which really just shows you, or it's kind of a proxy for aggregate demand declining or decreasing in the United States. And when aggregate demand is decreasing, it's very hard to avoid an economic contraction, if not a recession. So I think the main takeaway from step number 2 is it's very similar to the housing market, where you have very, very few transactions. But like Zillow said the other day, 53% of the homes on their website have declined in value over the last year. So with the labor market, let's say you've got a business of 100 people or you got 100 employees, you know that 10 of those employees are going to quit, and they're likely going to quit because they retire, they move, they do something else, or they maybe just want to drive Uber or work at Starbucks or whatever it is, and therefore they're not going to make that initial claim. So you see the amount of jobs decreasing, but then that employer says, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and let those 10 people quit, but I'm not going to hire anyone to replace them. Or I might use AI because demand for my product is very, very low. Now, and I'm just hoping, I'm keeping my fingers crossed, that when the Fed cuts rates, that's going to increase demand again. But usually what we see play out in these cycles is the Fed cuts rates in response to the economy. So the lower interest rates are a reflection of the economy. They don't control the economy. And we fast forward 3 months, 6 months, and now that same employer is at a point where they're like, okay, the economy isn't turning around. It's getting worse. Now I've got to start the mass layoffs. So it's not that businesses are out there just firing everybody, although they're firing a lot of people. It's that they're really not hiring anyone. That's the main takeaway.
Step number 3. Now let's go over the Big Daddy for economic indicators and see what signals we're getting from interest rates. And what's wild about interest rates is a lot of investors, a lot of talking heads in financial media, definitely social media, think that interest rates are just kind of out there and they're going to do whatever they're going to do, but there's not much information that you can receive from interest rates themselves. But nothing could be further from the truth. So let's look at a chart from today's date going all the way back to January. This is a chart just year to date of the 10-year Treasury yield. On the left, we go from 3.75 up to 5%. Well, you don't even need me to read this chart. You can see which direction the trend is going, and this is key. Why? Because most people think that what really drives interest rates are debt and deficits. So the bigger the debt is, the more supply of treasuries. Therefore, the higher the interest rates are going to go because the supply of treasuries is going to exceed demand. This is completely inaccurate. In fact, editor, go ahead and throw up a chart of nominal GDP and the 10-year Treasury yield, and we can see going back 70 years, if you want to, that there is a direct correlation. And then when we throw up a chart of interest rates and, I don't know, something like the debt or the deficit to GDP or the debt to GDP ratio, we can see there's basically an inverse correlation. And this really trips up a lot of investors because they look at these interest rates and they think that this is playing a role, therefore it's not that great of an economic signal. And like I said earlier, nothing could be further from the truth. Because these interest rates give us a read on what the market is predicting or what growth and inflation expectations are moving into the future. So when you look at interest rates through the lens of growth and inflation expectations, you say, the 10-year Treasury yield is telling us that growth and inflation expectations are going down. Well, if growth and inflation expectations are going down, what does that tell you about the U.S. economy? It tells you the exact same thing that the ADP numbers are telling you and the non-farm payrolls are telling you after the revisions. And what that means is moving into 2026, the probabilities are the U.S. economy slows down. Now, does that mean that we go into an outright recession or something that looks like the GFC? That we don't know yet. We have to continue to watch these signals that we've been talking about on this video, and that will reveal what the probabilities are. Notice I'm saying probabilities because at the end of the day, there are no certainties, there are only probabilities. But we can't bury our head in the sand as investors and pretend that everything that we talked about on this video doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, there is nothing, in my view, that matters more than the labor market and interest rates. So I know a lot of you right about now are saying to yourself, okay, George, I get what you're saying in this video and a lot of your videos. You kind of explain things well, but I don't know, is any of this actually actionable? I mean, I'm a retail investor. I've got a portfolio. I want to try to beat the S&P 500, at least beat inflation. I want to protect my wealth, hopefully grow it. But okay, how does the 10-year Treasury going down or what's happening with ADP actually help me set up my portfolio in a way where it's hopefully bulletproof? I can't give you any personal investing advice, but let me give an example of something I've done in my own portfolio using this intel that's made me a lot of money. So about a month ago or so, remember when we had the end of the shutdown? And that was right around when Jerome Powell came out with a very hawkish speech, and the 2-year Treasury yield went all the way up to maybe 3.63, 3.65. Now, I thought this was an overreaction from the market, that they were thinking that because the government shut down, then all of a sudden this growth in inflation expectations, well, they're going to infinity and beyond, like Buzz Lightyear. And I said, not really. I think the fundamentals are a lot weaker, and that's what's going to play out over the long run. So what I did is I went ahead and bought the 2-year Treasury yield. Now, I bought this with futures, and it gets a little bit technical. But that trade made me a lot of money over the time frame I had it on. And my point here is I would not have made that trade unless I was paying attention to the exact same things that we talk about, not only on this whiteboard, but on pretty much every single whiteboard I do on the George Gammon channel. And if you want to check out more insider intel and some of these contrarian strategies, I've got good news for you. I set up a private investment community with my good friends Chris McIntosh, Brent Johnson, Patrick Ceresna from Macro Voices, just to name a few. And it's specifically set up to help you, the retail investor, not only protect your wealth, but hopefully grow it into the future while we're living in these volatile times. It's called Rebel Capitals Pro. If you want to check it out, we'll put a link in the description below.